Test, test, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hi, welcome to the MP Mowersports shop here in Maine. Kind of tight quarters today. We've been packed under 5 feet of snow all winter up here, so a little jammed in the garage today. But one of the big questions we get all the time here, and it's on all the forums, all the internet, is how do we lower a lawnmower? We race primarily with the American Racing Mower Association. If you're with US, it's called, the machine we're building today is called a Super Stock. It's also JP class in both organizations, or the IMO class. The premise of what we're doing here to put this cart axle in this chassis can be done in all the prepared chassis classes in both organizations, and many other organizations as well. So we always get asked, how do I lower my mower? So there's a couple ways, whether you're using a transaxle or a cart axle. This particular one, we're going to show you how to do it with a cart axle. One of the things people also tell me, I don't have a lot of tools. I hate to tell you, if you're going to build a racing lawnmower, you're going to need some basic tools. You're going to need a sawzall, you're going to need a drill, you're going to need a welder. If you have those things, maybe a jigsaw, those kind of things, you're going to be able to probably build a racing lawnmower. I'm going to show you today how to put this axle in with a tool that most electricians have. Most everybody knows an electrician that's somewhat mechanically inclined. We punched a hole with a conduit hole punch. We'll get to that in a minute. Alright, I'm going to start with how I determine how high or low this axle is going to go in this chassis. What we're starting with is a typical box frame MTD frame. I have not put any frame rails in it yet. I'm still at the point where I want to be able to take this thing apart back and forth. It is been leveled and it's been measured up to make sure it's close to what I'm doing right now. It will go on a frame jig and be welded after we do some of the preliminary stuff. To start with, you need to know how high in the box your hole's going to be to mount your axle. Rules say you have to have 4 inches of ground clearance between the ground and the bottom of the frame. I do this by taking the wheel and tire combination that I'm going to use, which is this 16-inch tire, 8-inch rim, and I put it on something flat like this steel plate. I put a big square up here. I mount this tire up so it's nice and square. I'm using 1.25 inch axle. I know half of that is 5/8 of an inch. I have another square here that's 5/8 of an inch. So all I have to do is put this, lay it flat on the bottom, and this gives me the height that I'm trying to achieve. In this case, it's 8 1/8 inches to the center of my wheel with this tire with 15 pounds of air in it. I don't want to be that close during tech, because with the rest of the weight of the machine on the tire squatting down, that kind of stuff, it will be a little bit lower than the 4 inches. So I'm giving myself 1/4 inch extra. You can see my initial measurement when I marked this out is up here. My final measurement is 1/4 inch lower. I then determined where this is going to be front to back in the chassis. Rules say the rear axle has to be in the same position the original axle was in the machine chassis that you're using. In this case, the MTD was mounted right here. So in the center of that, I put a square, and I made it a vertical line. There's my vertical line of where the center line of my axle was. I then connected my 1/4 inch below my center line. There's my crosshairs. That's where I'm trying to hit now. I then punched my hole, and now I'm ready to put my plates in. In this build, I'm using a set of round plates because I don't plan on dropping the axle out of this chassis once it's built. There are other plates that you can buy. You buy a kit, say from EC Carburetors. You get something similar to this with the cassette mounts, the plates, and a set of bearings. Or it may be along the lines of something like this that's designed to drop the axle out the bottom. You would actually cut a slot. I don't particularly like to do that. I like to make the chassis as stiff as possible. I don't really care if I can drop the axle out. I'm not going to probably do that at a race. I got plenty of time at home to slide it out the hole in the side. I'd rather give up the ability to work on it quickly for the ability to have a very well handling stiff chassis. This is another kind of plate. If you're going to use 6-inch rear wheels with 13 650 by 6 tires, this particular plate actually mounts right on the bottom of this box frame, and that's where your hole would go. Not what we're building today, but that's one of your options for 6-inch wheels. So at this point, I have taken this plate and I've made a X through the center of it so that I can line it up with my X on the chassis. And you're going to line that all up, and you're just going to tack weld it for now until you start building the rest of the machine. You may find once you get this thing together with some weight that maybe you're a little too close to that 4 inches, and it'd be nice to just be able to cut a couple tack welds off and lower it another 1/8 of an inch to get you legal. If you weld it all on solid now, it's going to be hard to do that down the road. So I always suggest just a couple of tacks to hold it until you're towards the end of your fabrication and you got this thing where you want it. That's pretty much it for today. I will go through putting the axle in, cutting the holes in the back for your brake rotor and your chain in a different video. Going to get this thing to a rolling chassis. Probably going to be half a dozen videos made of getting this thing to a rolling chassis. Try and help the newbies. This is an awesome sport. My whole family's involved. My friends are involved. Take a quick scan around the shop here. You can see, part of what we own here. We have over 15 machines here at MP Mowersports. So, been doing this a while. This chassis here will be, I believe, number 41 that we've built here in the last few years. So, done a few of them, and we're going to try to make a little video series for everybody so they can try and enjoy the sport as much as we do. So, thanks for watching. This will be the first one, and look for a couple more to come pretty soon. Thanks. The last segment of this video, we showed you how to put the axle in, where to hang it, how to figure out where the center of your axle's going. We've now moved this chassis over to our frame table, albeit as messy as it is, but yours will look the same way after a few builds. I'm not going to bore you with cutting steel, grinding steel, welding steel in this video. I'm assuming if you're watching this video you already know how to do all that stuff, or you're working with somebody who does. I'm going to point out a few things on putting the frame rails in the MTD box frame. I'm going to start with these little posts right here. One of the things I learned right off the bat building one of these box frames is I got the frame rails all welded in, got this thing to final assembly, and realized that I had no way to put the bolts in to put the upper parts of the running boards on. Those are the holes. There's a set in the front by the motor and a set towards the back by the rear fender mounts that give a lot of stability to the running boards. The other two bolts are here that hold the running boards on, and I'm currently using them to hold the two pieces of the frame together. The back section and the front section. Those bolts will come out and the running boards will be bolted in place when they're done. I also, for the purpose of lining everything up, put the rod back in that the running boards bolt to on the ends. That just assures me everything is in line pretty close to where it's going to go. Now before you can weld the frame rails in, there's a couple spots in these frames you have to grind out. One of them is inside the frame here, and the frames vary. Some of them are in different places. I got arrows to where they are. They're just little bulges, they're rolls in the frame that give it stability as they stamp it. In order to get the frame rail to sit flat, you got to grind those down a little bit. And there's one back here, and there's one up in this front up here. There's also some raised bolt hole pieces in these frames that you got to grind out anywhere where the frame rails go. So you'll see those. Like I said, I'm not going to cover grinding and all that stuff. I'm sure everybody can figure that part out. So as you can see, I have about a dozen clamps here to hold two frame rails in place. I have put the transmission plate in on the bottom backwards on purpose. I don't want anybody to tell me that I've done something wrong. I understand. The reason for clamping the frame rails to the tranny plate in this position is to make sure my frame rails aren't like this in the chassis. I want them perfectly level and together. So the very first one of these I built, I got it to the point where I was getting ready to put the transmission plate in, and it rocked on the frame rails. So to try and combat that now, I weld the frame rails in with it just clamped in place back here, holding the two frame rails parallel with each other. That's a really good tip. Try to pay attention to that, because the most important thing to belt longevity is having your belts line up and having your motor plate and all that parallel to each other, or in line with each other. Otherwise you're going to fight belt problems the whole time you race your mower. So with that said, we've clamped the frame rails in place. I've measured from the top down to the frame rail in many places here to make sure it's pretty consistently flat. I'm sitting flat on my jig with the box. For the purposes of what I'm doing right now, that's good. I'm only going to tack these frame rails in the front and the back, and a couple small tacks in the middle at this point. I will then flip this around and actually weld it to my jig on the table, which has been leveled in all four directions, and I know that that is perfectly level. I will then fill in some of the holes with weld that are around the box from the outside, and that will be more than enough to hold it sturdy to take it off the frame jig and then tip it up and finish welding it. So that kind of covers getting the frame rails into your frame. From here on, you're going to do, like I said, tack them in place, start welding everything. You double check. I mean, there's no reason to rush this process right here. This is the foundation of your mower. Everything is based off of this process right here on how well your machine's going to handle. So that's about it. As always, throughout this series of shoots that we're doing here to build this chassis, if you got questions, feel free to shoot me a question. Next, we're going to go to installing the front end on this after I tack this up and get some of the welding done. After the front end, we're going to go to putting in all the dashboard mounting and all that kind of stuff. And once you got that done, you're pretty much home free on the rest of it. As long as you got some kind of fabrication skills, you'll be able to figure out the rest of it. We'll include mounting the tranny plate and that kind of stuff in the dashboard braces. So hope everybody's getting a little something out of this, and we'll send you another cut here in a little while. Thank you. Alright, we've covered before the machine upside down and mounting in the frame rails. We've now flipped it over. We got it sitting on the frame table on some 2x2 or 1x2 box that is sitting on some 2x2 box, so that gives me my 4 inches of clearance. Again, this table's been fully leveled, so I know everything's level. What we're going to cover here is the importance of getting some of the flex out of the chassis. If Aaron can get straight onto my level here, or my square, if I hold down on this side and I move this chassis up and down on the table, you can see that square moving. Okay, before I welded these two pieces in there, it was even way more exaggerated than that. Okay, we want to get rid of that. That's bad. For racing, that's bad. So we're going to add these pieces in here that takes the flex out of some of it. We're going to continue to add these pieces of 3/4 box up in the top of the box to support that. In my next part of my build here, I'm going to make dash supports that will support the steering shaft and the top of the dash, and they're going to come down inside this dash, down through the top of the box, and right beside this 3/4 stock, and be welded onto the top of the frame rails down at the bottom. And at the top, I'm going to catch these bearings in the top, and I'm going to weld one of these bearings in the steering hole at the bottom. Then the steering shaft will go in there and be held in place with lock collars. Putting this bracing inside the dash does a couple things. Gives me a place to mount my steering. It also goes at an angle, kind of in the line with the steering shaft through all this. And I can put a support that heads backwards that triangulates some of this box. And by doing that, all of those pieces welded together stiffen this chassis up tremendously and get some of that flex that we just saw out of this. That is the most important part of this area right here. Doing that, you don't want to add any more weight than you have to this machine. It's high weight as one thing, is something you want to get away from. And it's just a lot of extra weight if you make this out of big boxy stuff. The 3/4 tubing is fine. It's what most people use. A lot of machines out there made out of angle iron, big 1-inch heavy gauge box. This is just lightweight, light gauge 3/4 tubing, steel tubing, square tubing. Again, we got a newer style MTD dash with a newer style hood going on this. In our next update, we're going to have this front axle beam mounted and welded on the front with all the plates, and most of the front end parts will probably be in place. Probably the hood supports, so the hood will be on this. So, like I said before, I'm not going to go over welding, grinding, and cutting. You probably should already know how to do that if you're this far. So, that's pretty much it for this update. I did, as I mentioned earlier, I did tack my rear axle plates in. Just a couple tack welds. Got my cassette holders in there. I got my tire that I measured earlier. And got a hub inside there. And like I mentioned in the video before, my goal is to have all this stuff line up perfectly and just barely skim the table. And in this case it does. So my 4-inch clearance is still good. And we can pretty much know now that we can weld these cassette mounting plates in place where they are. So that's it for this update. The next one, we should have everything boxed in here. Up in the top here, and have all the dash supports in and the steering shaft in and the front end on. So I know it's a lot to cover, but we'll continue with this video, and hopefully we'll see some new people on the track from it. So stay tuned. Alright, earlier today I showed you the frame up right on the frame jig here. Explained putting in some dash supports here, and still got to make a bracket to mount my steering shaft bearing and that kind of stuff, but you get the gist of what's going on. All the supports are in now. I've mocked the machine up with the dash, some fenders, running boards, front end. Basically, when I started this video, I told you that I had a lot of questions on how to lower a machine. We went over how to mount the rear end. The front end just welds onto the front of this particular chassis. All the information that you need is online somewhere. If you got questions, go to MP Mowersports, ask questions. This is a properly braced MTD box chassis with the bracing up in the top of the box, dash bracing, all the frame rails are in the bottom. Typical front end that we use in racing nowadays. It's all stiff now. There's no more wiggling this thing like there was before. My 4 inches is just barely 4 inches underneath there for ground clearance. Front end is ready to have these front end pieces welded on. And it's going to be a direct steer, obviously, where there'll be a piece underneath this rod coming out to the left front tire. This pretty much covers it for lowering the machine. Not really planning on going much further with this video, unless it really takes off and people want to see more. Finishing it up just basically is another whole video, putting the motor in, transmission, all that kind of stuff. So if you like what you saw, you want to see more, then make comments on the bottom of the page here, and maybe I'll finish up the video with taking this thing all the way through paint and finishing it up and going to the first race with it. But thanks for tuning in. Make some comments if you liked what you saw. Thanks.